Hey y'all, Leela here with Miss Kiss Kreations. Welcome back to my channel. Today's tumbler tutorial, I'm going to show you how I created this simple holiday tumbler. Like always, all of my materials will be listed in my description below, including some direct links and coupon codes. And don't forget, you can find me on all of my socials, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok for more fun tips and tricks when it comes to tumblers and craft ideas. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. I'm using a 14-ounce thick stainless steel tumbler. I am going to stand this tumbler and wipe it down with 91% alcohol. After I did that, I'm applying my painter's tape inside because I'm going to spray this tumbler white. It does not matter which finish white you have. I use matte, but if you have gloss or satin on hand, you can use that. And once my spray paint was dried, I'm going in with Glitter Heart Co.'s Dazzle Glitter and Wishful Mica Powder. I add both of these to my already mixed epoxy. I'm using about 15 milliliters of epoxy. I don't want a big amount of epoxy or a very thick layer. I just want enough epoxy to mix in that additives, that glitter and mica powder, so I can have a nice shimmer on my tumbler. If you don't have mica powder on hand and you just want to use glitter, that's completely fine. I always like to add that Wishful mica powder. It gives it such a nice silver look for the holidays, and it almost makes it look like a candy cane. Make sure to mix in your glitter and mica powder after you finish mixing your part A and B. So mix your part A and B of your epoxy, mix in that glitter, and then mix in that mica powder, and you'll have a nice even ratio and you won't have any streaks on your tumbler. I apply this around my entire tumbler to include the bottom, and I make sure I apply an even amount. Once I finish applying it, I hit it with the heat gun just to make sure I pop any of those bubbles, and then I let this tumbler spin on the turner for about 4 hours, and then I wait a full 20 hours before moving on to the next step. So I make sure that this is cured for at least 24 hours because I'm going to add decals, and I don't want to place those decals on the tumbler while that epoxy isn't cured because I have a chance of ripping up that non-cured epoxy. So once all of my epoxy is on my tumbler, once it is cured, I'll see y'all for my next step. And after every epoxy tumbler, I take my X-Acto knife and I cut the rim just to remove any of that cured epoxy on my rim. And then I take my 180 grit sanding block and I'm going to sand on the rim of the tumbler, just exposing a little bit of that stainless steel to have that nice seal at the end. And then I'm going to sand lightly around the tumbler. I'm using a 100 grit sanding block for this because if I do turn that glitter a little bit silver, it's going to blend. And then I wipe away with 91% alcohol. And then I'm going to do some decals. So what I did was I went to Cricut Design Space and I found some snowflakes. So all I did was use their search engine and I typed in snowflakes and I found about 3 or 4 designs, and I just chose the ones I liked. And then I cut those snowflakes on 631 or temporary vinyl. So I did not use permanent vinyl. I am using temporary vinyl or 631 vinyl. And all I'm doing is weeding those now because these are going to act as a template on my tumbler. So it does not matter which color you use. These colors actually went well together, but it does not matter which colors you use. I'm just using the gray and the teal because that's what I had on hand. And then now I'm going to apply that transfer tape because I'm going to lay these down randomly on my tumbler. I decided to use bigger rather than smaller snowflakes on this small tumbler. So the biggest snowflake is 2 inch by 2 inch, and the smallest snowflake is 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. But you'll see that I chose the more bigger snowflakes. I think the ones that I use the most is the 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch. I like those on this tumbler. But if you want small snowflakes on your tumbler, then just add only small snowflakes. So all I did was I applied that transfer tape. I cut those transfer tape or those decals separately, and then I applied those decals all around my tumbler. I started with the bigger ones first because I wanted the bigger snowflakes on my tumblers, and then I went in and I filled in the blanks with the smaller snowflakes. I wanted more of the bigger snowflakes around the smaller tumbler. I thought it gave it more a modern look, in my opinion. I just wanted to try something new instead of adding small snowflakes. You'll see that I added this snowflake on the bottom. It was super easy since I used the temporary vinyl. You just add it over the edge and then you just peel that edge or the bottom of the decal on the bottom. And it does not matter if these decals like are wrinkly or crinkly, because again, these are acting as a template. So all of these decals are going to be removed from the tumbler. I just want to make sure that they're placed down very firmly and make sure that I press very hard to make sure that these are placed down. So whenever I spray paint over this tumbler, the spray paint's not going to get underneath that decal. So you'll see that I'm pressing very hard with my squeegee tool. Make sure that I'm rubbing very hard on the decals and then I'm peeling up that transfer tape. I don't want any chance of that spray paint to go underneath these decals because then you won't have a nice crisp snowflake. And I also want to mention that I only wanted snowflakes on this tumbler. So if you wanted to find a text or a quote like "let it snow," you can always add "let it snow" like the same way I'm adding these snowflakes, and then you could do kind of that peekaboo effect. So that's always fun. But again, I didn't want any quotes on this tumbler. I just wanted to be basically the snowflakes peeking through that nice glitter snowy tumbler. So you can always make your tumbler the way that you want to make it. I always try to make these tumblers as inspiration, and I know whatever you create is going to look beautiful. And once I was finished adding all of my decals to my tumbler, you do not have to seal these decals at all. So you are adding every single decal to the tumbler, and once you're finished adding the decal, you're going to take your tumbler outside and spray paint your tumbler. So right after this step, all I do is add some painter's tape inside of my tumbler so I don't get any overspray inside of my tumbler. You'll see me doing it now. And then I take my tumbler outside and I spray paint my tumbler. It's easy as that. And the spray paint colors I'm using are both from Rust-Oleum. I am using True Navy and Aqua. One is a ultra matte and one is a satin. If you have gloss on hand, you can use gloss. The only reason why I'm using matte and satin is because I wanted those specific colors with this tumbler. And you can always use more than 2 colors for this tumbler as well. So now I'm outside with my tumbler. I do live in an apartment, so that's why I have this little setup. I just basically use a tote from Walmart and I let that tote become my overspray tote. I'm going to first start with my True Navy, and I always start by spraying the bottom. So that's why I sprayed the bottom. And then now I'm focusing on the bottom rim so that overspray can hit the bottom of the tumbler. This is a very small tumbler, so it's hard to kind of control where the spray goes. But if you focus on the edge of the tumbler, then you'll have that tumbler get sprayed exactly where you want it to be sprayed. So when I spray the top of the tumbler, I'm also just focusing on the rim of the tumbler. So whenever I spray or when the spray comes out on the tumbler, it's going to go just on the top and just probably have 2 or 3 inches of that tumbler sprayed. And so the middle area won't be covered with that True Navy. Once I'm finished with the True Navy, I'm going to go in with my Aqua. And this is the easy part. I'm just going to spray the middle, and wherever that overspray goes is where it goes. If it has a nice little like overspray on the navy, then so be it, because I think that overspray gives it a nice Christmas look or like a snow furry look or flurry look. So I think it looks really nice. What I decided to do was after this step, I decided to let my tumbler dry, and then I came back outside and I did another coat. If you are fine or happy with this coat, then leave this how it is. But I wanted to let it dry. And then now I'm coming back outside and I'm kind of cleaning up those lines. And you don't want to press down on your nozzle a lot, because if you do, then a lot of that spray paint's going to come out. So I always do my small burst of spray paint. So I press on the nozzle a little bit at a time so I avoid dripping on my tumbler. So now I'm going to adjust my, I guess, my tote to maybe let y'all see it a little better. I think that's what I was trying to do, is trying to make the angle a little better. But I'm going to adjust my tote, and I want to basically just clean up these lines, and I think I was more worried about the bottom line, so I'm going to go in with that Aqua in the middle first, and then you'll see me change to go in with my navy and then finish with the Aqua. I always finish with the middle color, so if that overspray goes on the darker color, I'd rather that than the overspray of the darker color go on the Aqua color. And you'll see that me changing my camera angle did not help at all, so I do apologize for that. But you see that I'm not spraying long spurts. I'm pressing down, moving my spray can, and then moving my tumbler, and then pressing up. So it's not one long spray, it's small spurts, and that's how you avoid that dripping, and that's how you avoid overspraying your tumbler. Now I'm going in with my last coat of my Aqua, and I'm just trying to clean up the middle, again, as carefully as I can. If your lines aren't straight, that's okay. Don't worry about that, because I think whenever the lines are kind of crooked and not straight, I think it gives it a nice feel, but that's just me personally. So once I'm finished with this, it took my tumbler about 15 to 20 minutes to dry, and then we'll move on with peeling up those decals. All right, now that my spray paint is dried, here comes the fun part. This is my favorite part, but this is a very important part. So now we're going to peel up those decals. Whenever you peel up the decals, whenever you're using your weeding tool, that's how I peel it up. I always peel up these decals, and I place the weeding tool on my decal, and when I scrape that decal, I'm making sure to peel to another decal, if that makes sense. So you'll see whenever I pick at that decal, I'm picking towards the vinyl, and I'm not picking towards a blank spot on my tumbler. That way, if my weeding tool happens to slip, that weeding tool is going to slip on top of a vinyl piece, and it's not going to slip on top of a spray painted tumbler. So you won't have just a random line inside of your design. So I hope that makes sense. So if you watch it very closely, whenever I use that picking tool, I am going and I'm pressing towards another piece of vinyl, because if I happen to slip and I happen to create that line inside of my my design, I'm going to slip on a piece of vinyl that I'm going to peel up, so I won't have that scrape in my design. Like I said, I hope that makes sense. So this is very tedious. Make sure you take your time with this, and it's like oddly satisfying, but I really enjoy this part because you really start seeing your tumbler come together. And the great part about this is whenever you're finished with this step, we are ready to epoxy over this tumbler. It is super easy. All you do is peel up these decals, make sure you do it very carefully, and then you don't even have to let anything dry. You just go in and you epoxy right over this beautiful tumbler. And make sure before you epoxy, you do remove that painter's tape from the inside of the tumbler, or you will accidentally epoxy that painter's tape to your tumbler. I'm speaking from experience. So when I'm finished with this, I'll see y'all with epoxying my tumbler. And now to moving on to epoxying my tumbler. I am epoxying a clear coat of epoxy over this tumbler. And again, I'm using about 15 milliliters of epoxy total. So all I'm doing is placing the epoxy on my tumbler. And then while that epoxy was still wet, I wanted to give it more of a shimmer. So what I did was I went to my glitter collection and I decided to add some elegant and some diamonds from Glitter Heart Co. just on the blue area. So I tried my hardest to keep it on the blue area, but if some of the glitters went inside of the snowflake area, then that was okay. But I just took my fingers, like I pinched the glitter like salt, and then I just sprinkled that glitter on the blue area just to give it some shimmer, some dimension, and just to make it pop a little bit more. I felt like it missed something, so I thought that glitter really tied it together. And that's all that I wanted to add to this tumbler. Again, if you wanted to add a decal or anything, you can go back and add your decal, but I wanted just to have this sparkly, Christmassy, snowflakey tumbler, and was perfectly fine with me. So once I was finished with this coat of epoxy for my tumbler, I let this epoxy cure, and then I went back with another coat of epoxy. So this is not the last coat of epoxy because I do have this glitter on my tumbler, so I want to make sure that I lock that glitter in. So after this, I put about 10 milliliters of epoxy for my next coat, and then I was completely finished. If you still have some glitter peeking through after that 10 milliliters of epoxy, go ahead and add another coat of epoxy on that. Just make sure you have a very smooth tumbler and make sure that glitter is not peeking through. So I'm going to fast forward to my last coat of epoxy, and then I'm going to show y'all my final cleanup process and then show you the final tumbler. And here I am taking my X-Acto knife for the final time to remove any of that cured epoxy. And once I'm finished with this, I always take my tumbler and I always wash my tumbler out with some dish soap. I like to use Dawn, and I make sure to use a clean paper towel before selling or posting my tumbler for sale. Once I'm finished with that, I'll show you all my final tumbler. And here is that final tumbler. This tumbler is simply beautiful, and I love these colors for Christmas. And I personally think this is a beginner's tumbler. It looks very complex, but at the end of the day, it really is simple, just applying layer after layer. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more tumbler and craft videos. I am trying to make it to 100,000 subscribers by January, so please, 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 if you are a frequent watcher and follower, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.